AFCC family, coming to you while I'm out and about today, but excited to summarize this last week's sermon and to begin this series discussing in our small groups and on Wednesday night as we begin this series, Exile, Living Where We Don't Belong. And if you've been in this journey or really just living life, at some point you're going to have a feeling where you don't fit in. And sometimes you can feel like you don't fit in because of the way that you live, because you are following Christ. That can be your values, where you're asked to do something that you're not comfortable with because of your faith. Maybe your beliefs set you up into a position that you may be a target or a punching bag if people know that you follow Jesus and that you desire to live like him. Or maybe it's just actions, peer pressure. It's so easy to see that in the younger years of our life, especially middle school and high school, but peer pressure is just as present in adulthood and how we live our lives in that. And all of these things make us feel this way, that we don't belong. Where we are living, we don't belong. And that's today's conversation. And really it's the conversation in this season, because you're not alone. Actually, this feeling of not belonging is really a part of being God's people. And that for always, God's people have not belonged in this world. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week. And we're going to be looking to the story of Daniel, to the New Testament, to the story of Jesus himself, for what does it look like for us to be God's people when we feel like we don't belong. And so to begin, just defining what an exile is a person who's been expelled from a home or a country by an authority and dwells in a foreign land. Now, we, in this context, haven't been expelled from a foreign land. However, there's moments where we can look around and just feel like we don't belong here. And you can look after different cultural realities in our individual lives and in society where this is just like we don't fit. But we're looking at the story of Daniel, and I would encourage you in our small groups to read through the first chapter of Daniel together to kind of follow that story. But there's a couple things that happen. First, Daniel and other leaders in Israel are removed. They become exiles and they're taken to Babylon. And this happens in 605 BC, where the armies of Babylon come in and capture thousands, take the best the land has to offer, take the best of the people and those that have the most opportunities. And so for those Jews, they are sent to Babylon. And that being a minority is kind of a typical reality for God's people in that moment. And if you could imagine what it would be like for those families to come to a strange place, not know the language, not know the customs, and just how alien that would truly feel. But in this moment, so they're sent, and these four individuals are given all of the opportunities to be educated, to have food from the king's table, to get the education of the literature of the most powerful country in the world, in Babylon, to be educated and all of these different things. And for many of us, if we were to admit, it's really an upgrade of life. Assimilation, becoming more like the culture is something that comes natural to us. And for us in the American culture, that's kind of just a part of who we are, is to assimilate, to come together, to try to look similar and sound similar instead of being distinctive. And this is something that the Babylonians really started. And so if they can move you in that, they can change your beliefs, change you, then they can change what was Jews into Babylonians. And that's what we see with Daniel in this moment, where not only are they being educated, but they actually change his name from what was once glorifying to God to a name that is actually Belshazzar, which is looking to the god of the Babylonians for power and influence. And so we see a change of name, change of food, change of education, and it's at that moment of food where Daniel says no more. And he goes through the journey of asking for an adjustment to prove that they can honor God and still make the requirements of the Babylonian king, and it's granted to them, and they prove that in their obedience to God, they're actually even better to Babylon. But the thing is, we see in this moment when Daniel goes and talks to the person responsible for their education, and he says, I am afraid. That fear is the commodity of Babylon. It's how they motivate everything. That's true in the Old Testament times, ancient times, Jesus' time, even in our time. Fear is the commodity of the enemy, trying to make us give up what is distinctive about being God's people. And the question for you and for me is, are we going as followers of God, as followers of Jesus, to obey fear, or are we going to obey God? That's what it means to be an exile. And for us, looking back at the Daniel story, which is so amazing because it works out, but let's be honest, many of our stories don't work out quite as neatly when we are obedient. Sometimes we suffer, sometimes we struggle. But being a minority is kind of a typical reality. And we see it in Jesus himself, Jesus is the model exile. We see in John 17, I have given them your word, and the world hates them because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. Make them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth. Just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world. And we see in Jesus' own words, this is not just an excuse to be rude or to be unkind because we as Christians are going to be hated by this world, but it is because of how we live and how we share the love of the gospel of Jesus Christ that we can be obedient to God. But we see in this story, in Jesus and in Daniel, that Babylon utilizes the fear to mold people into their image. It's the same truth of what Jesus is praying against in John 17, that the world, they would not belong to the world, that we would not belong to the world, that we wouldn't be molded into the image of the enemy. And so once again, it's that idea, are we going to be obedient to fear? Are we going to be obedient to God? We, as followers of God, as being God's people, exiles in this world, living where we don't belong, because we belong with the Lord. We're sent people now. Once you accept Christ into your heart, you are now a part of God's people. God, what does it mean for God to love us? God is no longer in the New Testament and attached to any specific nation or specific type of people, but every person who calls on the name of God is a part of God's people, accepts Christ, believes in him, lives in his salvation, and desires to follow God, follow Jesus' example. That is who we are to be God's people. Will we live in fear? Will we live following Jesus' example as the best example, the model exile? And so I would encourage you, as we close in this time, to read 1 Peter 2, 11 and 15. And as you read that, before you go into discussion questions, I just encourage you that may your lives give honor to God. It's not just about what we believe, it's that lived gospel that matters so much into this world. And so look forward to having our discussion together.